Welcome to High Growth Matters, an open comp podcast for influential players in the pre-IPO ecosystem. This show shares insider knowledge about building a badass business, and the expert conversation you're about to hear will cover everything you need to know about hiring and retention, fundraising, leadership, diversity, and more. Let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of High Growth Matters. I'm Caitlin Allen, your host. And today we're going to talk about how some organizations treat recruiters much like order takers. And then there are others that really prioritize talent acquisition as something that is central to a company's success. And so we're talking to Julie Farr-Voller about which side of the fence is more conducive to hypergrowth, something she knows a lot about right now, and how her team has elevated recruiting into a strategic function over the last 2.5 years or so under her leadership at Dataminr. So Julie, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Dataminr?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. So I joined Dataminr permanently 2.5 years ago, having actually contracted for them a little bit in a previous function. And Dataminr always has a special part in my heart. We are a very mission-driven organization, and I joined to scale the international TA function. So we have opened up various offices internationally, and I manage the TA team that is responsible for hiring all of those people and for hiring the individuals into the growth offices.
I love it. And we're going to get into some of those specifics of how many countries, how many people on your team in a minute. That being said, one of the things we love to ask the professional before we get to know them as a professional is something personal. What is something that your coworkers don't generally know about you as a person?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty open book with my team, but one of the things I think that they would probably find amusing is that when I'm driving around in my car, I love to belt out like songs from the West End. So any sort of musicals, I'll have it on super loud and just sing along as I'm driving around. So I think they probably find that quite funny.
I love it. I actually did. I loved being in musicals in high school. I did it every year. So much fun.
Yeah. Escapism at its best.
Really well said. Yes. So let's get back to you on the work side, Julie. You are on the international talent acquisition team. And like I said, you've been there for 2.5 years at Dataminr. How has your team evolved over time while you've been there? How is it structured today?
Yeah, good question. So we started off with, I was actually the only recruiter on the international side, and I've hired a team. So I have a recruiting team that functions over our technical side of the business and also our business side. We also have talent specialists, a sourcing team, and we roll up into the global team that also has marketing capability and operations function. So as a team, we're pretty mature in our model, I believe. But yeah, on the international side, we've scaled to 5.
Okay, fabulous. And how large is the global team?
17, and that is spread out of the US and then in the UK at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That's super helpful for our listeners to kind of have situational awareness as we dive into this conversation. So how, as a global team and an international talent acquisition team, how does Dataminr approach building an employer brand that's global, but also local enough that it's appealing to candidates all over the world and in different parts of each country?
Yeah, it's difficult. So things that work in the US and that work in the UK might not work very well in Australia or in Germany. So what we try to do is at the middle of it, have our core values, and then we nuance it for the various locations. I think although we operate in many different countries and they're very different, the core value of Dataminr is pretty similar. So yeah, lots of nuances and definitely a little bit of trial and error as well along the way.
I would assume so, yes. And I'm excited to dive into what some of those nuances are in each of the countries your team hires in. But before we get there, maybe we can set the stage, because we're here to talk about how you've made talent acquisition strategic. How do you approach that, such that talent acquisition and recruiting is not something that seems seen as a tactical kind of more salesy kind of role at Dataminr?
Yeah, and it's something that the leadership team have worked really hard on to make sure that we are a strategic partner to the business, and it's something that's very much in my DNA. So I feel like I can empower the team to like push back on hiring managers, bring their opinion to the table. We definitely operate in a business partner model, so it's not a case of a hiring manager telling us to go and hire XYZ. We bring to the table market knowledge, like expertise. If you haven't worked in recruitment, I think it's hard to be that expert. Like a sales leader is an expert in sales, not necessarily how to recruit. And I think empowering my recruiters to have that mindset is really important, because it can be very easy to slip into an order taker style, but we are a business partner, so we don't work for the hiring team, we work with them. And some recruiters struggle with that when they first come on board to Dataminr. It's very different to where they've been before, but the end goal is that you are that thought leadership partner with your hiring manager in an ideal world.
Interesting. It feels very similar in some ways, your description, to how marketers describe the difference between being an order taker or being a core member of the C-level or the executive level team, where you're coming with insights, you're coming with expertise, you're coming with well-informed opinions, and working with and not for the rest of the executive team that cares about revenue. So I understand what you're saying. Let's get back to what you were saying about how an employer brand really needs to show up in different ways in different countries. And your team, I believe, hires in the UK, in Dublin, France, Germany, Denmark. I'm sure the list goes on. What are some of the hiring nuances that your team keeps aware or top of mind as they hire that our listeners should also know about?
Yeah, so also Australia is on that list as well. So we are spanning multiple time zones out of my UK team. But there's definitely nuances. I think one of the things that a US headquartered company probably can struggle with is the amount of time that it takes to hire internationally. So hiring in Germany, France takes a long time, and there are definitely different nuances with the way that those companies operate. So we acquired a company in Denmark, for example, and it's quite well publicized that Danish companies have a very, very strong family value. Your benefits have to be tailored towards family and being understanding that area of individuals' lives. And there's definitely different benefits and legislation in France and Germany, for example, that you also need to have in your perks and benefits package if you want to hire out there, whether it's one person or 10. You really need to have that. So it's advising our teams on those nuances. And whenever we do enter into a new country, it's a team sport. So we would have a expansion team, and TA very much has a seat at the table. That was me for Germany and France. I got to be in all of those meetings and give my knowledge on hiring in Germany and France and what you need to have, timeframes, but everyone is involved. So marketing, sales leaders, IT, even things like getting a Mac in France and getting it over to the employees there, things like that you have to think of. So there's definitely nuances.
How long, when you say a long time to hire in France, how long is long?
Well, the typical notice period in Germany is 3 months. So you have to factor that in. And then the time to find the talent, the time to find the talent in Germany and France as well. And 3 months notice can be quite typical in France too. So if you're looking for an enterprise AE, where a lot of software vendors are looking for that talent at the moment, it can take 6 months from kicking off the search to having your hire land. And that is pretty unusual for if you're hiring AEs in the US and in the UK, they can be in seat within a month. So it takes a lot of strategic planning to make sure that they are here in seat and functional by the time that you need them.
Wow. And I think too, in the US, right, we're used to 2 weeks is kind of standard notice, maybe a little bit longer if you're more senior, but I can imagine that takes a lot of educating for you up front since you're headquartered in the US in New York, to set expectations about what's actually reasonable.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yes, and we launched in France and Germany at the same time, so we really did throw ourselves in at the deep end to like take on all of those challenges. And I'm pretty lucky. The background I had was very much putting first feet on the ground in Europe for US companies. Like, I've walked this path before, so I could say with confidence at those meetings, the expansion meetings, that it's going to take XYZ. Right. There's obviously hires that you can make quicker and some that take longer, but 6 months for me is the time that you should budget as a minimum.
Yeah, that's very important to know. In Denmark, it sounds like benefits are really important, family-related benefits. You'd also mentioned in our prep call that Germany is a very hot talent market, but very hard, very difficult to hire in. Why is that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of US companies that want to crack the DACH market, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and there's probably companies that have tried and it hasn't been successful, and that news spreads. And just in general, with even outside of Germany at the moment, with the economy being as like crazy as it is, people are risk averse. So if you're coming into Germany as a US headquartered company and you want your first feet on the ground, like that's quite a lot of risk for an employee to take on. So it's about walking them through. In 2019, we were like our first feet in Australia. We're now over 60 people in Australia. When Dataminr gets into a region, we get momentum, we're successful. So yeah, but it can be very hard to be the only person in a new region. Definitely takes a certain type of person, I think, to want to take that challenge. And it's competitive. Everyone's looking to the same person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about your pay transparency for a minute. What does that look like in the global landscape?
Yeah, so we currently do not have it mandated, like the recent mandate in New York, for example, in the regions that we hire. But one thing I was thinking about this, with Dataminr, every single candidate goes through what we call a recruiter screen as a first step. And as a TA team, in that first call, we're pretty transparent around salary expectations, what we can comp for a role. We do not go to market without having the comp already mapped out, and we can be pretty transparent with candidates, even though in the UK it doesn't necessarily mandate me to do that. The one thing that I guess other regions might catch up on is the advertising of salary bands. So we're doing that everywhere in the US where it's required, but we haven't yet decided to do that in the international locations, perhaps where it is not a legal requirement yet. But we do cover it very early on in the process to make sure that we're on the same page and that the expectations are aligned.
Sure. Okay, great. That's amazing. And it sounds like on a global landscape too, the different requirements by countries are quite different. And in the US is a bit, is it accurate to say ahead of the times? Is it just variant?
Yeah, I think so. And we're led by our legal team and our external counsel as to what we do. And we, like I say, the New York guidance came in, we rolled it out, and we are compliant. And it was a strange time. We're not quite sure what was going to happen, and then they're out there, and nothing bad has happened. It's been fine. So I think it's just, but it wouldn't surprise me if it starts being mandated in international locations too.
That makes sense. How much does pay transparency matter to candidates, say in France or Germany or Denmark?
Yeah, I don't even think it's necessarily transparency. I think the pay equity piece will always come up, just in terms of like, how does Dataminr, comp for roles? How do you make sure it's fair? Like, we definitely would not want anyone sat at Dataminr thinking that they didn't have pay parity. It's something that we're very hot on, and it's not necessarily something that I've had German or French candidates bring up, because again, we hit it really early on in that first conversation. So I'd like to think that once they're in the business, they feel supported by our HR and their leaders.
It's a really good point, too, that the candidates care more about equity than transparency per se. I actually think that transparency is a how you get to the why you're doing it, and the why is pay equity. So it makes sense to me that would be what matters the most.
Yeah, and I definitely heard of candidates. I think, again, just being upfront about the ranges is a good way of is a good practice for us. I think there's nothing worse if you're engaged in a job search and like no one wants to talk about the salary, or people can't answer a question about the salary. I feel that organizations should not go to market without having, the comp aligned as well as they can before going and having those conversations.
Yeah. You referred a question or two back about the difference of hiring someone when it's the first person in a country versus hiring somebody globally to join an office that's established. Like I think your UK office is 180 people, and there are several countries you've mentioned where you've just hired your first few. How do you think about hiring that first employee when expanding into a new country? And I'm sure the profile is different.
Yeah, and I think for the first feet on the ground, or the first few feet on the ground, you really need entrepreneurial mindset, people that are up for the challenge. You definitely still probably need all of those things when hiring in an established office, but I just think you need that person that doesn't mind that everything's not there. You're not walking into a fully structured country and territory already. So there is definitely a difference. One thing I will say is that we are completely transparent up front about the situation that we have in France or Germany, because people will find out very quickly when they land if it's not as you say it will. And I was having a conversation with a recruiter in my team to the point where she mentioned, like, I feel like I'm putting people off sometimes just by like ripping the plaster off and telling them like everything that it is about coming in and being that first person. But I think we lead with transparency. But then when you join the 180 person office, maybe you don't get to be like as creative because things are already quite structured, they're already running. But I still think to work in a scale up, you have to have that entrepreneurial desire and want to be part of the, sometimes it can be chaos, and you have to be okay with that. And there's highs and lows. Again, you have to be okay with that.
Yeah, great points all around. I think there is, like you said, a big difference between hiring somebody that's a first versus hiring somebody that joins a team that's more established. And, for certain profiles, yes, it's going to be off-putting that there's maybe not much infrastructure in place and that you're a first employee in a country. And then for other people, I think that's really exciting and thrilling, right? It means ownership. It means creativity, to your point. So it's really just looking for that kind of response to the situation.
Yes, definitely. And you will notice as well, you start to get a sense that people will do this like 2 or 3 times. So, I was the first person for company X, and like I loved it. We built this, we built that, and it becomes, again, then you're like the first person for Dataminr, and you've done it before. But equally, if someone hadn't done it before, we would still consider that profile. Like someone's you've got to be the first time once. So but it is interesting. You see people like repeat the pattern.
That makes sense. So you located in the UK yourself are an international employee, so to speak, for a company that's headquartered in the US. And I know a lot of our listeners are at high growth companies that are either going global for the first time or they want to go global, and they're aware that managing a global workforce it brings with it its own nuance. So I'm curious what it's like for you working, as a quote international employee, and how would you advise our more US based people leaders to empower their international teams?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's definitely, like I say, things that work in New York that don't work here, and you have to be able to say that. And I'm pretty lucky, again, the LT that I report into, they appreciate the honesty around things like that. But I also think we have things to learn from the US team. So there's a lot of transferable skills. It's just that it's the nuance. And the piece of advice I'd give to anyone in a US leadership role with international teams would be use the expertise that you've got on the international side of the fence. So there's a lot of differences and nuances, and I would advise those individuals to learn about those nuances. Mm-hmm. So even though the international team over here tend to cover a lot of the international roles that we have, frequently the US recruiters will take on international roles, and they have to be well versed in Danish benefits, how to operate in Germany, hiring in Australia, and the same that we have to be in. We could have US roles frequently too. So as we're a very global orientated team, and I think it's just learn and find out and upskill yourself. Definitely had to learn the nuances of 401k and things like that just, again, we just don't have over here. So I would say keep the communication as honest and regular between you as you can.
Yes, and a lot of respect I'm hearing for areas of expertise where we can all learn from each other, where we can contribute value where others might not be able to.
Definitely. And I'm pretty happy that the team I'm in, you can literally just drop a Slack. Have you got 2 minutes? Can we talk through this? And that there isn't a silly question, in my opinion, when we're recruiting at pace globally, because there will be nuances, and I'd much rather that we foster that communication between us than inform a candidate incorrectly, for example. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well said. So switching gears a little bit, Julie, to retention, a topic that's really top of mind for high growth leaders right now as the new year starts and attrition can tend to be high. And while we're in a shifting economy where, growth at any cost is not something that's as much of a charter that business leaders are using. Talent acquisition, of course, is not responsible for retention, but it is responsible for getting the right talent in the door and starting off an employee's experience such that they're, maybe more likely to be a happy and productive and empowered and contributing team member. So long preamble to ask the question, which is, once companies like Dataminr have a really good employer brand, what can they do to then turn that value inward inside their company to improve retention?
Yes, and like you say, definitely slightly outside of TA once the talent is in. But given I'm an employee and I want to stay and develop here, I think one of the things that you should do is always be mindful of progression and career pathing and the opportunities that you offer those individuals, because it's hard hiring individuals, and once you have them in the business, you really want to work hard to retain that talent. So I think Dataminr has a lot of things in place. No matter where you are globally, we all have access to a professional development fund, which you can spend on your own learning, certifications. And also, I think our D&I team as well works really hard to make sure that everyone has that sense of belonging and that you can be authentic at Dataminr. So we have quite a robust ERG network that has been built by our DEI team, and everyone is encouraged to come and be part of those ERGs or join an ERG session and just listen and absorb. So I think if you can get that going and you can get a strong values within the core of the employee base, then hopefully people want to stay and keep developing. But it's definitely an issue, because like we are taking talent from other organizations, there's always a company that's probably looking at our top performers as well. So retention is tough.
Yeah. Love the balance there of, dedicated resources for learning, as well as dedicated resources for diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. So thank you for that answer. Maybe rounding out the conversation with the last few questions. So I've read rumors that Dataminr may register for an IPO at some point. Obviously, won't be asking you to comment on that, but the point being, you're in hypergrowth. So I'm curious, are there any extra implications that hypergrowth and a potential exit has for your team's strategy and execution these days?
I think if that is the route that happens, and again, like you say, it's difficult for me to comment on a potential IPO, but we're all pretty aware that being a private company and being a public company, there's different things that you have to be aware of. So in terms of from a TA perspective, I think that we're trying to be as well-rounded and robust as possible. So like I say, we've built an ops function, we've built a sourcing function recently, we've got TA marketing, just trying to make sure that we can deliver on the hyper growth for us to be successful and get to that point, hopefully. But in terms of our strategy, we keep wanting to be here to support the business and support that growth. Where that gets us in the time frame, who knows? But for now, international expansion is pretty top of mind, and that means that my team are going to be busy, and it's exciting. It's exciting going into new markets. So yeah, who knows?
Absolutely, 100%. I like that answer. It's basically, let's have the right specific talent in place so that people can be really excellent individual contributors with the expertise that's needed in hypergrowth, but still operating as a cohesive unit, as a cohesive team with kind of one dream, so to speak. So love that answer. I guess one question I have is actually a personal one. Again, Julie, our listeners all need to hire recruiters or talent acquisition experts at some point. And you yourself have fairly substantial in-house and agency experience, both as a consultant and an operator. And so I'm curious how that experience from your perspective, or in your opinion, contributes to setting you up to make talent acquisition strategic. Like, is that part of the profile of a successful recruiter?
I think it can be. I guess you won't, like, for me, that has been a great way, again, of making me really well-rounded. So I did some, the hard years on the agency side where it was a hustle and there were incredible highs and incredible lows. And that agency side, I believe, gave me a lot of tenacity, especially when I had my own business for several years, where I took the leap, I did it, and I had to hustle like crazy, basically, to be successful as a one-woman recruitment agency. And I think that side of my profile has always given me the appreciation for how a salesperson would operate, and given me that confidence to have the seat at the table, even if inside I was probably thinking I shouldn't be there. And then the in-house side, I think it's been incredible for me to see how much work an internal TA function puts into hiring. I think on the agency side, it's very you make your hire, you move on, you make the next hire. Once you're in-house, you can't go anywhere or decide not to work on that role. You have to fill the roles that are assigned to you, and it's so much more than just filling roles. It's being that advisor, having all of the strategic element of ops and marketing and strategy around how, okay, we've got to hire someone in Germany, how are we going to do that? There's so many things that are involved from an in-house function that I didn't realize when I was on the agency side. But I do think that agency edge, personally, for me, has been really helpful. And there's still highs and lows in internal TA as well, by the way. It's not all smooth sailing.
Right, of course. Yeah. But you raise a really, really great point. And actually, it's resonating for me personally, because I also was on the agency side and was an entrepreneur that started my own kind of one-woman show, and then it grew to 15 before I sold it. And I do think that kind of hustle, the grit, it gets cultivated in that environment where you have to make things work because you need to get paid. You have to think strategically. You have to be assertive. You have to have a voice at the executive table in order to push forward a deal, so to speak. And then you also have to be really good at delivery and have attention to detail in order to kind of re-earn that business. But, for me too, once I went in-house, there were so many steep learning curves, because it is the skill sets need to show up very differently. And so I think you make a really good point of how there's there's a whole lot of value that comes from having been on the outside and on the inside, and the benefits are equal, so to speak, although very different. Second to last question, you have as a mother and a professional, a pretty creative working situation, and you've extended that same opportunity, I think, to several members on your team. Can you tell us what work-life integration means to you as both a working mother and a woman in technology?
Yes. So I have quite an unusual setup at Dataminr, in that I work a 4.5-day week. So I have a half day off every week, and to be honest, I spend that with my 4-year-old daughter. So she was tiny when I joined Dataminr, and it was really important for me to have that time with her and sort of ring fence before she goes to school, just to, it sounds crazy, but just to like drink her up basically, and then just have that time with her. So yeah, I made my VP really aware that like it is really important to me, and luckily I got that flexibility. And I think probably not everyone in Dataminr realizes that I do 4.5 days, because you just have to be really organized and make sure that your work, that it's working. And again, when I hired a technical recruiter into my team, she was just coming off maternity leave. She also had an older child as well, and she asked if she could do if there would be an opportunity to come in on 4 days a week. And for me, like, she was the right candidate for my team. I asked the question and we made it happen. And again, she has all day on a Friday with her youngest daughter. And I think it's important to me because I imagine what it was like for her to even ask that question in the interview process, because I've already been there and asked the question. So I think it's I understand it's not possible for every role in every company, especially if you're scaling and resources are tight, but I will be forever thankful that I have this set up and that I've been able to extend it to someone else in my team.
Yes. And I love that you've paid that gift forward. I think that really underscores the value that you've derived from it, in my opinion. Well, Julie, I cannot believe we are near the end of our time already, but we are, and thank you.
Yeah.
It's super valuable. I'd love to close out with the question we ask all of our guests at the very end, which is, considering the quite sizable amount of great information you've shared and tips you've shared, if our listeners, our HR leader listeners, were going to apply one thing that you've said today, what would it be? It would be, as a TA function, be a business partner and not an order taker. That would be in my opinion, that is the ethos of a successful TA team. Show up and be the business partner. And that really captures it. You're right. Well, to our listeners, don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and email podcast@opencomp.com if you have ideas for topics or guests. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And Julie, thank you again so much. Thank you. It's been amazing. Win top talent while strengthening runway with OpenComp. Thousands of the world's fastest growing companies use our compensation intelligence platform because it offers the most competitive benchmarks and insights available. To learn more, visit app.opencomp.com/signup.